The October after the windstorm, an 11-year-old girl in Benton County, Oregon, dragged fallen branches and broken logs across her family's garden, and instead of burning them, she buried them. The storm had come through the Willamette Valley on a Thursday night and left half the county cleaning up. Every farm on the road had the same scene: by Saturday fallen alder and maple cut into rounds, brush piled shoulder high, and burn piles sending gray-yellow smoke across the fields through the weekend. Everyone was getting rid of the wood. Everyone except the girl. She pulled branches across the garden with a rope. She rolled logs too heavy for her arms by levering them with a fence post. She dug trenches in the vegetable beds 2 feet deep, the length of the plot, and laid the logs in the bottom the way you lay stones for a foundation. Then she stacked branches on top, packed leaves and compost around them, and shoveled dirt over the whole thing until what remained was a raised mound, 3 feet high, shaped like a loaf of bread. She built 4 of them in 3 weeks. The neighbors saw her do it. Mrs. Nguyen, who grew Thai basil and cilantro and peppers on the next lot, watched the girl roll a log across the driveway one afternoon and shook her head the way you shake your head at something you cannot explain but do not want to interrupt. That girl is burying firewood. She told her husband that evening, in Oregon, in October. Nobody asked the girl what she was doing. Her father asked once. She said it needed to be underground. She did not say why. Nobody in Benton County knew why she was burying perfectly good firewood. The following April, when frost killed every seedling on the road except hers, the logs answered. If stories of children who build what adults burn, gardens that warm themselves from the inside, and the kind of patience that turns storm damage into something alive mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. Tell us where you're watching from. We read everyone. The Marsh family farmed 5 acres on the west side of the valley, between Corvallis and Willamette, where the Willamette flattens out and the Coast Range rises blue in the distance. 5 acres is not a large operation. It is the kind of farm that sells at the Saturday market in Corvallis tomatoes, peppers, squash, berries in season, and earns enough to keep going but not enough to keep comfortable. The soil was good. Willamette Valley soil is some of the best in Oregon, dark, deep, built by 10,000 years of river flooding. The rain was generous, 40 inches a year, most of it between October and May. By every measure, the land wanted to grow things. The problem was not the dirt or the water. The problem was April. Willamette Valley sits in a trough between 2 mountain ranges, and cold air pools in the bottom the way water pools in a bathtub. On a still night in mid-April, the temperature can drop 20 degrees between sunset and dawn. Frost forms on the flat beds like a white sheet laid over everything the farmer planted 2 weeks too early. Tomato seedlings go black overnight. Pepper starts collapse into themselves. Squash leaves turn to dark wet rags by morning. The girl's father spent $300 to $500 every spring on frost protection row covers, frost blankets, cold frames built from old windows. Some years it worked. Some years the frost came harder than the forecast predicted, or arrived a week later than anyone expected, and the covers were already packed away. Each late frost cost the family between $1,000 and $3,000 in lost seedlings and shortened growing season. Mrs. Nguyen next door grew Vietnamese herbs, Thai basil, cilantro, lemongrass, hot peppers, and lost plants to frost nearly every April. Despite being the most careful gardener on the road, she covered her beds with plastic sheeting each night and uncovered them each morning. And still the cold found its way in. The girl watched all of this. She was 11, and she was the kind of child who noticed things before she named them. She built forts from scrap wood. She dammed the drainage ditch behind the barn to see how water pooled. She drew plans on graph paper before she dug anything, measuring twice with a tape measure she kept in her back pocket the way other children keep a phone. Her mother said it plainly one evening, that one sees building blocks where the rest of us see a mess. After the October windstorm, the girl saw building blocks everywhere. Every fallen branch, every cracked trunk, every shattered limb the neighbors were stacking to burn. She did not see firewood. She saw something else, but she had not found the word for it. Yet she found the word in a thrift store in Corvallis. On a shelf between a water-stained cookbook and a guide to macrame. The book cost $1.50. The cover was soft and faded, and the spine cracked when she opened it. It smelled like a garage that had been closed since the 90s. Chapter 7 changed everything. It described a farmer in Austria named Sepp Holzer who grew stone fruit and vegetables at an elevation of more than 3,000 feet in the Alps, a place where most agronomists said commercial farming was impossible. Holzer's secret was not a greenhouse or a heating system. It was buried wood. He dug trenches into the mountainside, filled them with logs and branches, covered them with compost and soil, and shaped the result into raised mounds. He called them hugelkultur beds, a German word meaning mound culture. The book had a cross-section diagram, logs at the bottom, large ones first, branches and twigs layered above, then leaves, compost, manure, then soil on top. Arrows pointed inward from the wood layer with a label the girl read 3 times. Decomposition heat. Soil temperature remains 3.5 warmer than surrounding ground. As the wood broke down slowly, over years fungi and bacteria consumed the cellulose and released energy as heat. The same biological process that makes a compost pile warm to the touch, but slower, steadier, stretched across a decade or two instead of a single season. The mound was not a garden bed. It was a furnace that ran on dead wood, and time there was more. The decomposing wood absorbed water like a sponge up to 300 liters per cubic meter and released it slowly during dry spells. Mycorrhizal fungi colonized the rotting logs and built networks that carried nutrients to plant roots. A single mound could produce food for 20 years as the buried wood gradually disappeared. There was a warning, too, underlined by a previous owner in pencil. Fresh wood ties up nitrogen. In the first year, the microbes consuming the wood steal nitrogen from the soil, and plants above them starve. The solution was simple. Add a nitrogen-rich layer between the wood and the soil. Manure, compost, or plant legumes the first year and let them fix their own nitrogen. The girl closed the book in the thrift store parking lot. She looked at the back seat of her mother's car, where 3 storm-felled alder logs had been sitting since the weekend. Alder, the book said alder was ideal. It fixes nitrogen naturally, even as it decomposes. She had the logs, she had the book, she had 4 garden beds that froze every April. She paid $1.50 and went home to dig. The first mound taught her what the book had warned about, and she had read too quickly to respect. She built it in the first week of November, logs on the bottom, branches above. Leaves and compost packed into the gaps, soil shoveled over the top until the mound stood 3 feet high at the center. She was proud of it. She planted tomato seedlings the following weekend, pushing the starts into the fresh soil with the confidence of someone who has read a chapter once and believes she has understood it. 2 weeks later, the leaves turned yellow. Not the pale yellow of too much water, the dull, starved yellow of nitrogen deficiency, the exact symptom the book had described in a paragraph she had skimmed past on her way to the diagram. The fresh wood beneath the soil was pulling nitrogen downward, feeding the fungi that were eating it, and leaving nothing for the roots above. Her father stood at the edge of the mound and looked at the yellowing tomatoes with the expression of a man who had expected this. "Logs don't grow tomatoes," he said. He was not unkind. He was practical, and practical men state facts. She went back to the book, read the warning slowly this time. Chicken manure, the old composted kind layered between the wood and the soil, would solve the nitrogen problem. The family had a coop with a year's worth of aged litter sitting in a pile behind the barn. Cost nothing. She dug into mound 1, added a 6-inch layer of old chicken litter, rebuilt the soil cap and replanted with pole beans instead of tomatoes. Beans fix their own nitrogen. By December, the bean shoots were green and climbing. Then the rain came for mound 2. Oregon rain between November and February is not gentle. It is steady, patient, and heavy. Mound 2 had been built with sides too steep, nearly 70 degrees, and the soil could not hold. One morning in January, she walked outside and found the south face slumped open, logs exposed like ribs, dirt pooled at the base. It looked exactly like what the neighbors had been calling it. "Her dirt mountains are falling apart," Mrs. Nguyen reported to the road, not unkindly. "That's not a garden, that's a compost pile. Having a bad day." The girl read the book again. Slope, 45 to 60 degrees maximum, mulch the surface to hold soil. She reshaped mound 2, gentler angle, thick layer of leaf mulch on every face, and waited for the next rain. It held. By February, she had 4 mounds standing in the garden like small green hills among the flat beds. Nobody on the road took them seriously, but on a cold morning in the second week of February, the girl knelt beside mound 3 and pressed her hand flat against the soil. It was warm. Not summer warm, not hot, but warmer than the flatbed 3 feet away, warmer than the bare ground beside the driveway. Warmer than anything in the garden had a right to be in February, in western Oregon. She pulled a thermometer from her pocket, the same one her father used to check soil temperature before planting, and pushed it into the mound. 48 degrees. She pushed it into the flat bed beside the mound. 41, 7 degrees. She wrote it in her graph paper notebook with a pencil that was getting shorter each week. Mound 3, 48F ground, 41F, it's working. The frost came on April 14th. The forecast had called for 35 degrees. It hit 28. Nobody was ready. Row covers were still folded in barns. Frost blankets were stacked on shelves. The cold arrived 7 degrees below prediction on a still, clear night when the valley floor pooled with air so cold it settled like water into every low spot between the Coast Range and the Cascades. Mrs. Nguyen lost everything. 200 starts thigh basil, cilantro, hot peppers planted in flat beds that she had covered with plastic sheeting 2 nights earlier, but uncovered that morning because the forecast said 35. By dawn, the leaves were black. The stems were soft. The basil smelled sweet and wrong, the way herbs smell when ice has broken their cells from the inside. 2 months of work. $400 in seed and soil. Gone between midnight and 5 in the morning. The girl's father lost 40% of his tomato seedlings on the flat beds south of the mounds. He had covered them with lightweight row cover, enough for 35, not enough for 28. The peppers were gone entirely. The squash starts had collapsed into wet, dark shapes that no longer resembled plants. Across the valley, the Saturday market lost a week. Growers posted on the co-op board. Frost damage, delayed harvest, reduced supply. The numbers circulated quietly between $1,000 and $3,000 per farm, depending on what had been planted and what had survived. The girl walked out to the mounds at 6 in the morning. The flat beds on either side were white with frost, the soil crusted and hard. The dead seedlings bent at angles that living plants do not make. The air was still cold enough to see her breath. The mounds were not white. They were dark, damp. A faint haze of steam rose from the surface of mound, 3 visible in the cold air. The way breath is visible, the way warmth becomes something you can see when everything around it is freezing. The decomposing logs inside were doing what they had been doing since November, consuming cellulose. Feeding fungi, releasing heat, and the heat had held the soil at 35 degrees while the flat ground dropped to 28. The tomato seedlings on Mound 3 had frost damage on their outermost leaves, a light brown crisping at the edges. But the stems were firm, the growing tips were green, the plants were standing, every seedling on the 4 mounds was alive. Mrs. Nguyen was standing at her fence at 7, looking at her own bed's black stems. Collapsed leaves, the smell of frost-killed basil drifting across the property line. Then she looked at the mounds. Dark earth, faint steam, green leaves with brown edges, alive. She stood there a long time. Then she walked over. She came through the garden gate without knocking. The girl was crouched beside Mound 3, checking the tomato stems one by one, pressing each gently between her thumb and finger, the way you test whether something is still alive. Mrs. Nguyen walked around the first mound without speaking. She looked at the soil, dark, damp, no frost. She looked at the seedlings standing, green at the centers, brown only at the tips. She walked to the second mound, the third. At each one she paused and looked at the flat bed beside it, white, crusted, dead. Then at the mound, dark, steaming faintly, alive, the same garden, the same night, the same 28 degrees. 2 different results, 3 feet apart. She knelt beside Mound 3. She pressed her palm flat against the soil the way the girl had done in February. Her hand stayed there for a long time. When she lifted it, her expression had changed, not to surprise exactly, but to the look of someone who has just discovered that a thing she dismissed for 5 months has been quietly doing something she did not think dirt could do. She stood up and looked at the girl. "How is this dirt warm?" The girl set down the seedling she was checking. She looked at Mrs. Nguyen the way 11-year-olds look at adults when they have been waiting for the question without knowing they were waiting. The logs are still alive inside. Mrs. Nguyen looked at the mound. She looked at the steam still rising from the surface in the cold April air. She looked across the fence at her own beds, 200 starts. 2 months of mornings, $400 of seeds, black and soft and finished. She looked back at the mound, where buried stormwood was slowly, invisibly, keeping the soil 3 degrees above freezing with nothing but the quiet heat of its own decomposition. "My peppers are all gone," she said. "Everyone." She paused. "Could you show me how to build one of these?" The girl nodded. She went inside and came back with a book that cost $1.50 and smelled like a garage in May. The girl and Mrs. Guyan built a mound together on the Guyan lot using storm wood that was still piled at the edge of the property 5 months after the windstorm, untouched, too heavy to haul and not worth the cost to remove. They dug the trench together. They rolled the logs together. Mrs. Nguyen laid the chicken manure layer herself after the girl explained why the first mound had turned the tomatoes yellow. Cost of materials, nothing. Cost of the lesson, 5 months of watching from the wrong side of the fence. The girl's father did not say anything about the mounds for a long time. But in June, at the far corner of the commercial beds, the corner farthest from the road, where no one driving past would notice, he dug a trench and buried 3 alder logs from the storm pile he had been meaning to burn since October. He did not tell anyone at supper. He did not ask the girl for the book. He just dug. The girl saw the fresh dirt from the garden the next morning. She did not say anything either. Sepp Holzer once said, "In nature there is no waste. There is only resource in the wrong place." An 11-year-old girl in Benton County read that sentence in a book that cost $1.50. And she took it literally. She did not have a budget. She did not have a greenhouse. She had a windstorm, a garden that froze every April, and the understanding that a pile of dead wood is not an ending but a beginning slow. Warm and patient enough to outlast the coldest night the valley could deliver. The storm left behind exactly what the garden needed. She just had to bury it instead of burn it. What has a storm left in your yard that might be worth more in the ground than in the fire? Tell us in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe, and we will see you next week.